and welcome to part 2 of Power BI for Beginners. In our first video, we loaded in our data, we transformed our data, and we set up relationships between our different tables. In this video, we're going to take it a step further. We're going to start building measures to aggregate our data. We're going to start putting it into tables and slicing up our data to see how we might eventually want to display it in our report. So let's get started. Alrighty, when we left off, we finished creating our relationships between our fact table and our dimension tables, and we were getting ready to start analyzing our data, doing what Power BI was built to do. So from our model view here, we're going to jump up to report view, and this is kind of your blank canvas page. And along with your top menu up here, you'll notice you have filters on the side, and if you don't, they might be closed in like that. You can open them back up like that. You have visualizations and data. You have these three panels on the side that have menus inside them. We've already talked about the data panel and how it has your different tables in it with all of your fields. We put all of our columns or fields in a folder for each one so that they're easy to find, especially once we start creating measures. We can separate the columns from the measures, and I'll explain what those are in just a moment. But we're going to move on to this visualizations panel here. This little toolbox right here is going to be all of the things that you're going to use to show your data, to show your analysis. You've got tables, graphs, charts, all kinds of things. So the first thing we're going to do is go with the OG visual, a good old table right here. Here's a table. We're going to click it, and it will populate essentially an empty table. So this is basically saying, I don't have any data assigned to me yet. So select or drag fields to populate this visual. And when you create a visual or select a visual, on the visualizations panel over here, down at the bottom, this is where you can start telling it what fields you want to use. Like if I change this, which if you have it already selected, you can change it to something else. Let's say I wanted a line chart. Now this changes and it says, what do you want your x-axis to be? What do you want your y-axis to be? What do you want your secondary y-axis, legend, small multiples? All these different things are where you can drag your columns or measures to display the data in the visual. So if we jump back to table, it's asking us, what do you want the columns to be? Now, if we make this bigger, I'm going to move it up and then I'm going to drag it. We could just replicate a table exactly. So if we say our categories table, if we drop down columns, if we have this selected and we just start checking these off, it's going to replicate the exact category table that we have in our data view. See, we just created it exactly the same. So if we go back, we can eliminate columns and just have only one column. Now it's going to show you the different category codes in that table. If we add some things back, you can also click on this little drop down on any field that you have, and you can tell it what you want it, how you want it to aggregate that field. So if we put count, now you see that we have a column for count of item code. Now, since we have this replicated as the entire column, it's just going to say, yeah, there's one item code in this row. So it doesn't help us too much, but we're going to get rid of all those columns because we're not really trying to replicate tables we already have. We're trying to aggregate and display the data in new ways to tell new stories about it. If all we needed was the tables, then we wouldn't need Power BI. But I do want to show you how you can create a pretty effective table in Power BI just from dragging some fields. So I'm going to move this down just a little bit. So if we come over to our sales data and we drop down columns, I'm going to drag this over just a little bit so I can see it better. A little more. There we go. Make sure that your table is selected here. I'm going to select item code. Now it's going to tell me all the item codes. What if I wanted to know the average sale by item code? Well, I can come down here to my unit selling price and add it. Now it's giving me a unit selling price by item code. Now, if I come over here to this little drop down, it's telling me it's not summarizing it right now. So it's just going line by line in the table and giving me the unit selling price line by line. Now, if I said I want to average this, now it has said for this item code, of every row in the table for this item code, this is the average. So now it has made this row, the item code, a distinct row. These won't repeat because it's averaging the average sale for each one. So you'll see they aren't repeating anymore. Like this one right here, the average sales 5.07. If I change this back to don't summarize, you'll see they repeat again. So there's item code that ends in 168. It's got this many sales right here in the entire table, because since item code is our first column, it's going to sort by item code. And this is the number of sales this item has had, and that's each one. But if you notice, if I come back to average, now it's going to aggregate it by item code and give me the average selling price of each item. I can also change how it calculates. I can go, well, give me the sum instead. Now there's the total sum for each item code. So you can see if we're not summarizing, then you have multiple instances of the item code because it's just pulling it from the raw data. We can even sort by item code if we wanted to. That will sort in ascending order, and then this sorts in descending order. Now I'm going to do something, Now we're going to do something that shows or highlights the power in Power BI again. I'm going to drag my table down just a little bit. I might even squash it down a little. And then I'm going to click in the white space around it to deselect the table. Then I'm going to go right here, and it says Slicer. You can see it's got a little filter icon on it. I'm going to click Slicer. I'm going to drag it to kind of line it up here. Might make it a little smaller. And then I'm going to drag my table up to match it. There we go. I'm going to click my slicer. And what a slicer is going to do is apply a filter to the data on this page. So right now the data on this page is item code and sum of unit selling price. So whatever filter I apply here is going to start slicing this data up. And we're going to filter it by our date column. But not necessarily the date column. We're going to drag down our columns here, and we're going to use the year, which, remember, is extracted from our date. So we're going to go year. Now, by default, the slicer gives you sort of a between like this. I'm not a super big fan of that one for years. I like to come over here to this little middle icon. It says Format Your Visual. I go down to Slicer Settings, and then I like to select a drop down. That's my favorite for year because it's nice and clean. I can see all my years right here. So what happens when I select 2021? Now everything has changed. It has sliced up the data to say only for rows where the date is 2021, I'm going to sum the different item codes. So for all of the data in the sales table where the date is not a 2021 date, it's going to exclude it from this data now. And because I have a relationship, if we go back here, and because I have a relationship set up between date and sale date, Power BI knows that if I select 2021, the year, that means I also want to just select 2021 out of my date column here because it's extracted from that column. Then it's going to say, well, only the dates that have 2021 is the year. And since this table can filter this table, then when I select 2021, it's also going to filter all of the data in this table where the date is not 2021 out. It's going to get rid of all of those rows temporarily for whatever visual you have selected. So if I change this to 2022, it shifts again, and now I'm only looking at rows where the sale date is 2022. And this is where you can really start to see the strength of Power BI. I mean, you can do this kind of stuff in Excel, but you have to kind of manipulate the data quite a bit to go back and forth and filter things and slice things. And in Power BI, you can set up how it looks, and we're going to do that later. But you get to decide what all these slicers and filters are, and you can kind of build a dashboard to cut up your data and present it how you want to present it. And you can build all these relationships on the back end. So it is extremely powerful for building these dashboard type reports, because you can string all these different data sources together and make it work in one clean presentation. You could also, like, say we had our categories in an Excel file somewhere and they don't change hardly ever, and if we change them we just manually add one, but our sales data is in a SQL server or some other database. It doesn't really matter for Power BI, because we could connect to the SQL server by itself, then connect to the Excel sheet, then relate them on the item code field, and this would still work exactly the same as we're doing now. So you can connect data sources from all over the place together to give one seamless report. So now that we've started adding things up and showing some calculations, let's get into measures. And to do that, we're going to come over to our sales table. We're going to click our sales table, and up here at the top, you'll see new measure and quick measure. I'm not going to get into quick measures too much. I did kind of start out with them when I started learning Power BI, but I quickly moved to new measure because writing the DAX yourself, and DAX stands for Data Analysis Expressions. It's a sort of coding language that you use in Power BI. You use it in a few other places as well throughout the Microsoft ecosystem. But the primary place that it's used today is Power BI. And you use it to write measures. You also use it to write calculated columns. So think of it this way. If I wanted to say, if I wanted to do this sale category, I'm going to go to my table view here so you can see it better. So remember how we made the sale category in Power Query? We could do that same thing in DAX with a calculated column. It takes more data and more computational resources to do it with a calculated column rather than doing it in Power Query, which is why we did it in Power Query. But sometimes you'll need to do it as a calculated column. And measures are a dynamic calculation that isn't a column. So they work a little bit differently, and they're insanely powerful when it comes to Power BI. And I'm going to begin to show you how they work right now. So if we come back to our sales table, sorry I'm jumping around a lot. We're going to go to new measure. So you'll see your little formula bar up here that will pop up when you create a new measure. We're going to type out our measure. Now, I realize that we're getting into a little bit more complex part of Power BI that could have its own entire course and does have its own entire courses about it. DAX is a pretty large and integral part of building Power BI reports. I want to just show you how the report is kind of built start to finish in this series, so I'm not going to dive super deep into DAX. We will have other videos that do that, but for this one you can just sort of copy what I'm typing, and I'll explain what it's doing as we're going, but just know that this video is not the video where we're going to go deep into DAX. This video is made to show you how we go from start to finish creating a Power BI report. So for our measure here, we're actually going to just clone what we did right here so that you can see how this kind of works together. So we're going to say total sales. We're going to type an equal sign. Anything in front of the equal sign is the measure name. Anything after is the formula for it. So we're going to say sum. You'll notice IntelliSense tries to predict what you're going to type. It gets it right most of the time, really, because it's going by the most commonly used functions. And so if you type SU, you're probably going to type sum. So you can hit tab and it'll finish it for you and open the parentheses. Now the parentheses is where you define what you're summing or what you're adding up. And in most DAX formulas, the parentheses is where you are defining what fields you're going to apply these calculations to or use in this calculation. So now it's saying, what do you want to sum? And we're going to type an apostrophe, because what that's going to do is tell us which table. You'll notice in the apostrophes, you have categories, date. If you scroll down, we have sales, and we have categories, date, and sales over here. So the apostrophe tells us what table. The square brackets tell us which column or field. So I am going to do the sales table. So I'm going to type sale. I'm going to start to type sales. It's the only S table we have. So it says, well, I guess you're using the sales table. And since it's on this already, the blue has highlighted the sales, I can just tab and it'll finish it. Now it says, well, we have the sales table. Which column do you want? And you can use your arrows to just navigate up and down if you want to, or you can put a square bracket and start to type it. And we want the unit selling price. So if I start to type unit, it says that's the only one left. It must be that one. So we're going to hit tab. And then the last thing we need to do is close our parentheses to tell our DAX expression we want to sum this, and that's it. We're done. Then to make it a measure, we're going to hit enter. Now you'll notice over here, it says total sales under the sales table. One thing that you kind of got to get used to in Power BI is the table you have selected. See how it's kind of grayed, highlighted there? The table you have selected when you hit new measure is where that measure is going to go. So if I had selected the date table, that measure is going to go in the date table. It's not a super big deal if it's not in the right table, because measures can still calculate things from any table no matter where they're at, but it is really nice to have them all organized. So we're totaling the unit selling price of the sales table here, so I want this in the sales table. Now, in the past and probably still, some people will create a measures table, and I can show you how to do that as well. I have kind of adopted the mindset that I had seen on a video of having a columns folder and then having a measures folder for each table so that it keeps everything nice, neat, and organized. So let's get back to our table here that we've created. We've filtered it down to the year 2022. We have the field of unit selling price. If I click on my table, you'll see we have item code and unit selling price. It's also listed here under columns, item code and sum of unit selling price. So it's adding up the selling price of each item code. I can also add my new measure. And you'll notice it is exactly the same, right? So it populates the same thing, because what it's doing is summing that column, which is what this is doing. We've dragged that column over and we're summing it. Now you might say, well, why don't we just sum the column instead of creating a measure? And in some cases, if you only needed to sum this once in one visual, maybe that's okay. But measures do offer us several advantages. They are reusable, meaning I can drag this into many different visuals, and it's always going to do the same thing. They're predictable because I wrote it. I know what it's going to do. And I can also write measures to be quite complex. So if I wanted to do like a profit calculation here, or a loss calculation here, or some sort of other calculation on the column without creating a new column that does that, I can do it in a measure. And measures are optimized for performance. So whenever they're not being used, they aren't sort of taking up computational resources in your model. So you really do need to get used to using measures, because as you get deeper into it, you'll see the power that they offer and the speed that they offer is going to be quite a bit greater than that of just summing a column. And it gives you a little more clarity too. So if someone comes into your data model and they see sales and they see columns, and if this was in a measures folder, which it will be in a moment, they come down and see total sales, that's pretty clear that we're just summing sales. You know, it gives them an idea of what that is. And you could say average sale. We can just do that so I can show you what I mean. So we're going to create a new measure. You see it pop down a new measure. We're going to title it average sale equals, and we're just type average, and Power BI is like, hey, you must be wanting to average something. So we're going to hit tab. We're going to hit an apostrophe, and we're going to start typing sales. It assumed it, got it right. Now we're going to do square brackets, and we're going to do unit selling price, tab, and close our parentheses. So now we're going to average the unit selling price. We're going to hit enter. And I can now add it to my table. So now we have the total sales and the average sale of our item code. And now that we have two measures over here, I'm going to show you how I kind of organize them. You come down here to the model view, and I'm going to click this measure. Now, since they're separated by the columns, I can't hit shift. It's going to select everything. So I'm just going to select average and then control, so I can select my two measures. And then in my display folder here, I'm going to type measures and hit tab. And now my measures are in their own folder and my columns are in their own folder. So nice and neat. You'll also notice that measures have a calculator by them. That's Power BI telling you this is a measure, not a column. So you can identify them pretty easily, but it is nice to have everything cleaned up and organized. So we're going to jump back to our report view here. So now that we have made some calculations off item code, I want to show you how the power of relationships in Power BI can be taken even further. So let's remove item code, and we can leave our sum of selling price, our total sales, and our average sale. We could actually get rid of the sum because total sales is that. And you'll notice the measures are still working. Total sales is now just totaling everything for the year 2022 from this table. So unit selling price, it's totaling every row in the sales table for the year 2022. And the same thing for average sale. If I change this, they will change. So now those have shifted. That's another really cool thing of measures, is that they're reusable and they just always continue to work across multiple visuals. They aren't tied to a table other than how they get their calculations. So let's show the power of relationships here again. We have our date relationship telling us how to filter this table, but what if we wanted to pull down categories? Let's add to our table item name. Now you'll see it did the same thing that it did earlier for item code, but now it's giving us the item name. So now it's actually readable, because the item codes really are just like, if we add one to the item codes, who's going to be able to remember what each of these are? You're not. It's great to have because it's a nice identifier of which item is what, and you're going to need it, but you won't read this in a report. So we're going to get rid of item code and we're going to go off item name. But if you'll remember, we don't have item name in the sales table. We only have item code, but we have a categories table that's much smaller that tells us the item name based on the item code. But since Power BI has a relationship between item code, we can just tell it, give me every item name, and then I want all of the total sales and average sale in the sales table based off of item code. So because of this relationship, we can now get item name instead of item code without having to have an item name column in our sales table. And that can get really powerful on really large data sets, because now there's a lot of information you don't need in your fact table. You can just have dimension tables that add that information in for you. And another really cool thing we can do is we can take this even further. Say we didn't just want item name. Instead, we wanted category name. I'm going to move this up here because it adds it to the bottom. I'm going to drag this up to the top to make it our first column here. I'm also going to drag this over a little bit so it's a little more easy to read. Okay, so now we have our category name, and there's only 6. And so when you drag category name, it automatically gives you the distinct category names and gives you the total sales, which is this measure here. It's the sum of unit selling price from the sales table. And then we have the average sale, which is going to average the unit selling price from the sales table. And now that we've drug category name over here, it's aggregating the sales table to all of the sales that fall under aquatic tuberous vegetables under category name. So if we go to our category table here, so item code, all the item codes that fall under flower leafy vegetables are going to fall under flower/leafy vegetables here. Because we have that item code tied to the sales table, it can figure out which items in the sales table fall under that category. And so we can add them up by that category. And that's another very powerful tool in Power BI. Now, quickly, I'm going to show you one more kind of even cooler thing. If we change this table to a matrix, like if you have it selected and we change it to a matrix, now we can actually add more fields under our rows category, and this gets really cool. So I'm going to show you something real fast. I'm going to drag item name under category name. Now you'll have these little plus signs, which means you can drill down. And what you can do here now is, let's say cabbage. If I click this,
Now it gives me all of the item names that fall within Cabbage and gives me those calculations based off those. So once you shift from a table to matrix, now you can do all these drill down calculations so that people using your report can kind of drill into what they want to see. You can even drill down it like this, where you have category name and all of the item names underneath each category. And you can drill back up to eliminate that. You could even click these double down arrows and it will drill straight down to the item name. So an insane amount of analytical power here just in a table or a matrix, just from having a relationship from one fact table to one dimension table that gives us category name.